Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the effectiveness of different types of air-to-ground weapons against different types of targets. For the purpose of this little examination here, what I've done is I've set up a little bit of range over here at the NTTR, and we're basically going to be experimenting with different types. Now, to do this, basically, I set myself up a bunch of simple targets. These training targets have different durabilities. They're actually different sizes. The smallest target is going to be here on the left. The largest target is going to be over here on the right. Now, directly behind that, of course, so we have a group of different types of targets. The first row, of course, is going to be generic infantry. The second row is going to be some tanks. T-55s are not the strongest tanks out there, but for this purpose, I think it'll demonstrate quite nicely. And then, of course, for my last row is going to be a bunch of trucks. Nothing terribly exciting. So for the purposes of our little experiment, what we would have done is grabbed a bunch of A10s, and I've taken each one of these A10s, and I've loaded them up with the exact same load, and basically ordered them to attack each row of targets in turn. The first thing we're going to be taking a look at is what they call high-drag bombs. These are going to be weapons that have some kind of device on the back of them for the purposes of slowing down. The real reason why they utilize these, of course, is to allow us to come in at a lower altitude, deploy the weapon, and not be caught in the blast of the weapon. So in order to simulate that, what I've done is I've set each one of these aircraft to about 2,000 feet above ground level for the purpose of this particular strike here, so we have a pretty good idea. So there's a bunch of things we're evaluating here. First of all, it's our ability to hit something, and especially with the very small target over here on the left, it's going to be a process. The second thing is how much effect we have. Now you're probably saying, I really didn't need to put this many rows of these targets, but the reason why I have done that here is in order to allow us to have the most reliability for our little experiment here. Obviously, this is a measurement of accuracy, this is a measurement of hitting infantry, this is a measurement of doing damage, and of course the last row here is a measurement of just how much trouble I can cause. So let's see the fireworks in action. So our first row, obliterated. Second row, this is our infantry row. Oh, there it is. Coming into the third row here. Oh boy. This is the armor. Oh, oof, oof. And of course, I'm coming to our first and final row here as well. All right, looking good, looking good. Pretty clean release, gentlemen. Good practice today. Good practice. All right, let's go ahead and close out of that and take a look at the results. So here's the things we can see immediately. First of all, accuracy-wise, the A-10, I definitely pulled this aircraft out for a reason because of its tremendously good accuracy. That kind of eliminates some of those variables. The second thing we can see very, very clearly here is just how incredibly successful our weapons were against everything but our armored foes. As a matter of fact, if we were to switch real quickly over to red here, you will see that our armored foes, several of them like nothing. Like it did a little bit of damage, and that was about it. To give you an idea, of course, there was some structural damage here. And if I actually were to click on one of these units, hit damage control, you'd probably see that a few of them were destroyed, and some of our sensors were also affected. So bombs in this case, our high drag bombs, were not the best choice. What happens when we switch to low drag bombs? Now, what we've done is we've taken our A10s, and we've stripped away the Snake Eyes there, actually the air version of the Mark 82s, and we've swapped them for the conventional Mark 82s. Now, conventional Mark 82s are pretty standard weapons, nothing too crazy. They're low drag bombs, you can see right here. But the big thing with these is they've got pretty solid accuracy, depending on what altitude, and I've intentionally jacked the altitude of my A10s up a little bit higher in order to kind of create a little bit more variability, especially against the smaller targets here. The other thing we know from these is we're going to be dropping them all at once. That's something I did not clarify initially there. Let me go ahead and click on this one real quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop some altitude real quick, just a moment. Now, the one big thing that we have going for us with low drag bombs is we have a lot of them. We're releasing 12 at a time here. This is a pretty good size stick of these when we're getting down to our targets here. And again, we're going to come in at a little bit higher altitude to simulate the typical employment ranges of these. Theoretically, anything under 10,000, we've explored that in other videos before, is a pretty good altitude if you're trying to get a fairly reliable hit here. But this should work fairly well for us as far as simulating just how harder it is to strike targets, especially when you bring a little bit of altitude into these kind of equations here. So our guy in the back here, he's dropping pretty darn fast. He's down at 20,000. Everybody else is kind of dipping down. Basically going to be flying a very, very long dive here to get down to our targets. So it's going to be kind of slick here. We're going to hit that altitude right about on time to when we need to release, which is going to be pretty good for us. Simulate that kind of long dive, typical of these kind of weapons. Of course, in the real world, we don't like to dive long times like this, because when you do that, you pretty much let everybody down here know who you're attacking, sort of telegraphing your move to give them sort of a heads up, especially if they have some shorter launch stuff ready to go for you. There we go. Everybody's leveling off at about 12,000 feet, which is exactly what I desired here. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. They're swinging across here. Looks good. Looks good. Love it. Perfectly done, A10 friends. Perfectly done, A10 friends. All right, let's see what happens. Remember, our smallest target is here on the left. Our largest target is over here on the right. So we're going to get a little closer. The release is going to come sooner. And the reason our release is sooner is because it's going to take a longer time for the bombs to get there. Everybody breaks apart. Now they head back to Nellis Air Force Base, which is quite satisfying. Our next rows are going to be sneaking in. Remember, this is about 1,000 meters across, so about a kilometer apart, in case you're curious about my distances, in case you want to recreate an experiment like what you have here. He goes ahead and drops his stuff right there. Looks pretty good to me. The next row is going to be sneaking up in just a few moments, and to go ahead and do their damage. I'm actually going to reduce my volume a little bit so I can hear again at some point today. All right, our small targets obliterated. Again, 12,000 feet with 12 Mark 82 bombs here. Coming to our second row here. Remember, this is our infantry row. Oh, such a stack of bombs there. And you can see all the infantry, with a couple little exceptions, are pretty much rendered combat ineffective here. Coming down here for the armor, this is where things are going to get a little different, of course. We're going to have the same problem we had before, where we're basically going to be striking them. Whoa, look at that stack. And it kind of spreads all over the place. And then lastly, we have our trucks, which are sort of hanging out in the back here. Of course, we have that 1A10 who's a little late to the party here. Achoo! Or as I like to yell, ground handling. And we'll just let him kind of do his little pass here. He's come ripping across the deserts. Looking in, drops him, presses release, squeezes the trigger, CCIP, and here we go. Oh, look at that lovely stack right across. All right, let's see the damage. Now, if you take a look here, you'll probably observe that the damage is about the same as it was in the last one. You can see our infantry took the brunt of it. Any of the hard targets that we had down here were completely obliterated. All of our infantry is... Some infantry are okay. Remember, infantry are fairly distributed, which makes it a little bit harder to get with a clean hit. But as we saw from last time, our armor basically did fine. The only armor that really got messed up here were the ones that got very clean hits. But even then, when we go to damage control here, you can see we got one of the 3 tanks, which is... not terrible. I mean, it's pretty effective. So as we can see, low drag bombs in general, high drag bombs, kind of conventional bombs, they certainly do the trick, but they're still a little weak against armor. So let's take a look at rockets next. Now, for the purpose of taking a look at rockets, we're going to concentrate on unguided rockets. There are different types of rockets, APQUIS, for example, or laser-guided rockets. They tend to have a very different accuracy than these. The other thing we've done is we swapped the A-10 for the Sukhoi 25 TM here. This is a modernized tank-killing airplane. Absolutely fantastic for this demonstration. And the rocket we're using are going to be 80mm rockets, which are a pretty typical size of a rocket. And these actually have a heat warhead. And one of the things I love about these aircraft is they don't hold like 5 of them. Each one of these aircraft hold 160 of them. And the reason I really like that for a demonstration here is it's going to really make you appreciate just the sheer volume it's going to take to achieve what it's going to try to do here. So we're swinging across here. Everybody's locked on. They're about 3,000 feet up. And the fireworks start. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Now you'll notice here on our first pass against our targets, believe it or not, we did make hits on our small target as our next target, but you can see we actually didn't do a terrible amount of damage here. And notice how many rockets it's taking. We're hitting as many as we can here. And now we had a pretty clean pass there. Here comes our next group coming in here. They're starting to release. Oh, look at that, right into those tanks. Oh man, those things are going everywhere. Remember, this is one pass. Keep in mind, we have many more rockets where that came from, and we'll continue our demonstration here. But we'll take a look at our initial damage as we kind of swing by. Here comes that last crew. They're going against those trucks. You can see we're getting a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 off at a time here. Go ahead and pause. Now, the reason I'm pausing there, even though we have plenty more rockets, is to show you the overall effectiveness of one run. Keep in mind, we only fired between 8 and 16 rockets per group. I think a couple got 24 off. But we can see right away, our conventional targets are still targets, no problem. We had no difficulty doing our damage here. Looking at our infantry, we did nothing. Looking to our larger armored targets, we did some damage. And of course, to our trucks, we also did some damage. So what I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to unpause. And I'm going to speed up time a little bit here. And the reason I'm doing that is to kind of let my rocket friends go ahead and fire off the rest of the rockets here, just for the purposes of kind of getting a feel for these weapons here. And it's very amusing to watch this, because I would know in the real world, trying to coordinate this many aircraft to not run into each other at those kinds of altitudes would be an absolute nightmare here. And I will let them kind of fire it off here. And it looks like we're doing okay here. We're doing okay. A couple more targets, and I think we're just about ready to get that last one. There we go. Pause. Okay, so to give you an idea of how successfully unsuccessful this is, I think this is kind of funny. Well, let's go down. We fired 690 rockets, and incredibly, one of the targets is still sitting here. So one of the big things you have to know about rockets is you need a lot of them to achieve things. So they're not necessarily bad weapons. They're just not going to be optimum against many targets. But the other thing I wanted you to observe is notice how even though they were 80 millimeter rockets, they can still kill tanks just as well. It just takes a lot of them to do it. So the next one is a rather more interesting weapon, and those are cluster bombs. Now, this is going to be interesting because there's really two big flavors of cluster bombs. I would actually argue there's three big flavors because they come in grape and strawberry. No, the reason I say that is because different types of cluster bombs have different types of submunitions. The first cluster bomb technique we're going to be seeing here is a CBU-87, and this is a CEM. That's a combined effects munition. And the big thing with this particular bomb here is it has multiple dual-purpose bomblets on board. Think of this as a big spread of bombs rather than little big ones. So we'll go ahead and take a look at actually both kinds. There's another type of cluster bomb as well, which is a sensor-fused weapon. Those are cluster bombs that actually release a smart munition for the purpose of doing damage. So now the reason this is going to be interesting is our A-10s, again, they don't carry a ton of these things when they do these bombs. We're only dropping 6 of these at a time. Now I expect my frame rate not to like me in a second. The classic reason we use cluster munitions is the spread. Whoa! Look at that. Whoa! That's a lot of firepower over a very small area. We're going to see the big ones in a minute here. All right, so we completely obliterated everything except for the smallest building. Going against the infantry. Whoa! We got the infantry. Nice here. Going against our armor coming up next is our next demonstration. I think it's funny. This guy in the end always survives. Just kind of one of those RNG kind of a thing. All right, next group. Whoa! And we'll go against the final group here. This is our trucks, if you recall. All right, let's see the effect of 6 of these. Keep in mind, we're dropping half as many. And looking real quickly here, I can actually let the smoke settle here, that we got devastated. I can see here my armor is almost completely obliterated. All the targets except for the smallest target, of course, got really badly wrecked here, and it's an absolute disaster as far as durability goes. Keep in mind, cluster bombs, we're not going to explore that today. We just don't have time for it. That's going to be exploring things like if you're in the woods as opposed to the open desert like we have here, open shrublands. So now I mentioned a moment ago, there are different types of cluster bombs. Now let's see what happens when we do the cluster bombs that have a larger bomb rather than little tiny bomblets. Now, whereas the previous cluster bomb that we dropped was 202 little tiny bomblets, this one uses a slightly different philosophy. And for this particular one, you'll see here, again, we're dropping only 6 of these. You have 45 of these big ones, and you have mines to make things interesting. This is basically an area denial kind of weapon. So if we don't hit them the first time, we'll certainly get them the second time kind of a situation. So first row is coming in here, ripping across about 3,000 feet above the open shrublands, according to our little reader there. Comes up on our small target. Remember, the small target has had a really fun day today. It's not really gotten damaged very often, which I think is very true to the precision here. So first group. Oh! Smoke everywhere. All right, here comes our next group here. And the next group. Infantry obliterated. Armor not looking so hot here. And of course, we have our trucks in the back. Oh my gosh, look at that. All right, let's switch to the other seat and see what happened. So going with a larger bomblet, I think you'll find this very fascinating, caused us to do incredible amount of damage. You can see very clearly here, there's basically nothing left. Notice our very small target, for whatever reason, just is surviving. It's just too small of a target to reliably hit, even though it's not a special bunker or anything like that. Our armor really got nailed this time. You can see we lost almost every single tank with the exception of basically 1 for each one of those platoons. So as we can see here, changing the size of the cluster only has a minor impact. Going with the bigger bomblet, if you want to think about it another way, really doesn't make that much of a difference damage-wise, but it does seem to have a small impact on how easy it is to hit things. So it's almost like go small or go home kind of a thing. Now, our next weapon, of course, is something a little more specialized, and that is a guided missile. Now, for this one, we've taken the F-16 and gone ahead and equipped them with a pair of Mavericks. Mavericks are way bigger and way heavier than they look, 304 kilograms here. Now, these are really, really sophisticated missiles that once they're launched after locking onto a target, they guide themselves towards what they're going to attack there. Now, the reason this is so different for us over here is the fact that this finally gives us the capability to actually engage targets directly. If I come over here, pause real quick, Shift F1, you can see that we still have to detect the target prior to firing. That's not unusual. And that's even though we have this extended range, we still have to be able to see our targets. And one of the things you'll notice here is our back row has actually fired before our front row has. And the reason this has happened is because we're still trying to get a lock on these very, very, very small targets. And one of the downsides, of course, with using these types of weapons is being able to get a good look and actually get that lock. So even though we're going against these little targets here, you think our F-16s would have an easier time of it. And that's kind of one of the downsides of this. So, of course, our front rows is going to fire off all of our weapons against our infantry. You can see there it's coming in pretty well. These folks are coming in real low now. Probably drop them down to a lower altitude. And our weapons are on the way. So, unfortunately, our front row here never acquired the actual targets down here on the ground. Just to give you an idea of the fact that there's absolutely no probable thermal structure or anything like that that's giving them off. We'd have to come back around with another pass and basically hit them with something a little more conventional here. So our infantry, of course, got nailed first, and you can see that whole entire row of infantry. I took both of those Mavericks basically in the face. Our armor rows are going to get hit next, and then you can see they're all just arriving right about the same time. I'll go ahead and check on that one that missed. Classic for me usually means I forgot one. And here comes our last. Notice these are fire and forget weapons, by the way. And they come rushing in, wham, slam into the back row there. All right, let's switch teams and see what happened. So I can see right away that this was probably the least effective strike that we've had of the entire group. You're probably expecting to have this dynamite effect on everybody. But believe it or not, guided missiles are very, very pinpoint weapons. I click on this particular group here. You'll notice I fired 2 guided missiles at it. I got 2 destructed tanks. I'll come over to this one, for example, for my little infantry unit here. If I click on it, they were hit with 2 missiles. They lost 2 units. Our little trucks back here, I'll go and look at these. They go hit with 2 missiles. They lost 2 units. You can almost predict that. The only group that only lost a single unit here, you'll see it lost a single truck. So as you can see, our guided weapons are fantastic for reach, but they're not necessarily as destructive as a lot of the other weapons that we saw here. So it's kind of interesting how that's sort of almost unexpected. Naturally, there's other classes of guided weapons. We could be using JDAMs or laser-guided bombs on these targets with fantastic effect. But I was going to leave that out so that you could kind of see it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take a look at the final weapon, probably the one you didn't expect. Now, the final weapon we're going to take a look at, and yes, there are definitely others. There are some very interesting cruise missiles, as I mentioned, laser-guided bombs, JDAMs, things like that, is none other than the classic, everybody's favorite, the cannon. Now, believe it or not, inside of Command Modern Operations, if you do want to use built-in cannons, you have to absolutely make sure that you set your loadouts in such a way that they can. You'll notice air-to-ground strafing. I've actually turned that one on here. And the other thing you'll probably notice is under weapon state, I actually changed it to Winchester because I really don't want them to waste, come in a dive, forget that they're attacking, then go home. Believe it or not, all these F-16s are not equipped with air-to-ground weaponry. I just threw on some AMRAAMs on them, essentially, for the purposes of this demonstration here. Now, the reason this is so much fun to watch, of course, is these F-16s have to get stupid low in order to really get an effective hit here. So you can actually watch them basically dropping off the planet here in order to get low enough to do their strafing runs. So here they come. They're coming up on our targets in just a few seconds here. It's a satisfying sound. You can see how the little wall of bullets come out of them. Make their first pass. Here comes the next group. That's satisfying. Now, one of the things you're probably observing here, and I'll give you a moment to kind of see that once we finish up with this. Go ahead and close this out for a second here. Speed up time a little bit. Here comes the next row of F-16s. Looks pretty good. And here comes our final row of F-16s. They're coming down. They're doing their little dive. Little bits of skirts of little tiny clouds are coming off their wingtips as they're pulling up to finish up their strike here. And there we have it. So let's go ahead and take a look over here on the left. And you can see here that we fired an awful lot of bullets and made an awful lot of noise, but unfortunately, nothing actually got struck. Our poor F-16s here, these are air-to-air units. They're not really good at this kind of a thing like that. But effectiveness-wise, it is not the most effective strategy. And keep in mind, there are other types of units that we could use for this particular purpose as well that would have a different kind of an impact. Now, to end this video, of course, we can't just leave all these targets completely unscraped. We definitely needed a better unit for that particular purpose. We basically kept shooting into the terrain rather than shooting into our targets. That's what makes air-to-air guns so hard to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean this all up in one quick maneuver. It'd be certainly a shame if somebody accidentally deployed a kind of weapon that I am not really a big fan of on this group of targets here, because that would just be incredible. Uh-oh, what's that? I wonder what that is. What could be that one little... Oh, the only dropping one. Didn't you learn anything from watching the video earlier that just dropping one is not going to have the same effect as dropping multiple? Oh, what a silly thing to drop. I wonder what that's going to do anyway. It seems to be straightening out. Oh, it's dropping a parachute. I wonder what the deal with that is. That's kind of interesting. Slowly making its way to... Oh! Well, there goes my watchtowers. So as you can see, there's a wide variety of different air-to-ground weapons that you have at your disposal in a typical scenario here. This is one of the air-to-ground weapons I usually not a big fan of utilizing, but one of the things I just want to point out from that usage of that weapon that's probably going to get me in a lot of trouble one of these days is the fact that, surprise, surprise, it actually wasn't that effective. And the big reason, of course, because it wasn't effective is because you've got some really icky terrain here. This is not even terrain, even though it looks like it is even terrain. And a lot of that blast basically didn't even touch several of our targets. And insanely, you can see one of my watchtowers actually survived that somehow, which I find kind of interesting. Like I said, not what I expected. I did hit the target and destroy it. So the big conclusions here are this. First of all, whenever you're using air-to-ground weapons, you need to keep in mind there's other things to worry about. We have to worry about problems, especially, where's our little F-16 here? We'll track him on his way home as he's head back there. So a bunch of things we have to consider. First thing, naturally, is you need to be thinking about the types of targets. As you saw here, generally heavier targets require heavier munitions. The second thing you probably saw is the incredible effectiveness of cluster weapons. It didn't matter if you had a million little bomblets or you had just a few bomblets, kind of a thing like that. All of them were very effective against all varieties of targets that we dropped. The other thing we saw is when you switch to precision-guided munitions, especially the missile variety, they're really good at plinking single targets. So they're not really good at doing area damage. If you need to get a lot at one time, it's actually better to use conventional weapons, believe it or not, which I thought was very interesting as far as that goes. The other thing we saw, of course, too, is rockets. Even though they're wicked cheap, you're going to need a lot of them in order to achieve any real damage. Also, look at how many craters are in this field here. Love that. And then finally, just always be thinking about your terrain. If you're going to be using very large weapons, and again, this could be a totally separate video, you need to keep that in mind, because if the terrain isn't conducive to the blast, you're not going to have nearly as successful of an operation. Enjoy.